Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Acidified Cans Food webinar today. My name is Elizabeth Newbold with the Northeast Center to Advance Food Safety, or NECAFS. And NECAFS is a regional project which is funded by the FDA and the USDA and hosted by the University of Vermont. And we provide education, outreach, and technical support to producers and processors across the Northeast that are impacted by the Food Safety Modernization Act, or FSMA. And I just wanted to take a couple of minutes and talk to you about the ways that you can get connected to NECAFS and stay in touch with us throughout the year. So we have a website with specifics about programming. This is also where you can view all of our past recorded webinars. You can reach out to us through email. We also have a listserv that you can connect with others, ask questions, and share information. Our e-newsletter is our main form of communication, and this goes out about once every few weeks, and it provides updates on our upcoming activities and opportunities, and it's a good way to learn about programming like webinars, workshops, and our annual meeting. We've got Facebook and Twitter, of course, with weekly posts. And then finally, if you're not familiar with it, the Food Safety Resources Clearinghouse. This is a one-stop shop for food safety related resources created by our federal, state, university, and community-based organizations from across the nation. And if you haven't already looked at this website, go ahead and check it out. There are currently 375 resources on there as of today, and that number keeps growing. You don't need to be fervently writing all this down. I will copy and paste these links into the chat box so you can pull them up for later reference. So before we get started today with the presentation, we'd like to launch a couple of questions on the poll function, and I'll go ahead and start that. The first one is if you can all just let us know what your role is in the food safety system, and you can go ahead and choose from those listed, choose one option, and we'll leave that there for just a few seconds. And in the meantime, Amanda, if you want to, you can always take the presenter back because you'll be doing the presentation.
Okay, thanks, Eliza.
And I'll just give this a couple more seconds before closing. Okay, great. And now I've got another question. And this one is, are you producing, processing, or working with producers and or processors that are currently producing value-added products from specialty crops, yes or no? And Amanda, can you tell us what you mean by specialty crops?
Yeah, specialty crops it's an agricultural term, and broadly speaking, it's primary fruits and vegetables, non-animal grains or corn, feed and that type of stuff, but more like sweet corn, tomatoes, cabbages, all wide variety of crops but they deem them special.
Great. And if you answered yes, if you want to, you can list the products that you're working on in the chat box so that we have a sense of that and an estimated amount that is produced in the most recent year. So you can just put that information into the chat box. Okay, we'll close that poll. We'll go to the next question. And the next one is, how interested are you in producing and selling acidified canned products from specialty crops in the next growing season? And so 1 is not at all, and 5 is very interested. Okay, looks like most people have answered that. Wow, 50% of you have said very interested. This is great. We've just got a couple more questions before starting the presentation. Okay, I'll close that one. And now the next question is, all right, that seems like the same question. Sorry, guys, hold on a second. Let me close that. I relaunched the same question. Okay, here we go. Rate your current level of skills needed for producing acidified canned products from specialty crops, with 1 having no skill and 5 being very skilled. And this is the same scale as the other questions. And then we've just got 2 more questions. Appreciate everybody providing this feedback. All right, great. Okay. And then the next question is, what is your current knowledge of the state rules and regulations pertaining to the production and sale of value-added products? And again, 1 is no knowledge and 5 is very knowledgeable. And I will say that if you have questions or comments, if you have questions for the presenter, you can put those into the question box. And if you just have anything general that you want to share, that can go into the chat box. And as I mentioned, I'll be putting the links that I had in the slide earlier into the chat box. But for questions, please go ahead and put them into the question box. Okay, and so for the final question on the poll that we'll launch is, how confident are you that you will begin producing and selling value-added products for specialty crops in the next growing season? And again, 1 is not at all confident and 5 being very confident. Okay, and that is our final poll. And so I'll close those down. And Amanda, I cannot see your screen. You want to share your
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you could see it. Screen. Can you see my screen?
Yes. Okay, great.
Oh,
And so
wait.
now that's the presenter view.
Yep. Sorry, it moved. How did I do that before? Sorry, I thought it had already headed up.
Yep. If
Let
you
me.
take it back and then when it says show my screen, choose the,
Yep. Okay. That's it.
great. Okay. So now we turn to the presentation, and it's great to have Amanda Kinchla from the University of Massachusetts Amherst with us to discuss her research and process behind developing 12 shelf-stable acidified canned food recipes that are intended for commercial use. And I'm excited to learn from Amanda and now turn it over to you. Go ahead.
Thanks, Elizabeth. And thank you all for attending today's program. With me today is Mariana Cortez. She's one of the undergraduate researchers who's helped me with this project, and she'll be sharing her perspective of this project overall. So this project, the gist of it is taking household recipes or raw book recipes and scaling them up to being commercially viable for production. And there was a lot of different reasons for this. But the idea was to maximize, and later on today we'll explain some of those logistics of the regulatory requirements and the process components that are needed to do this for commercial operations. But there's several reasons what motivated this project. One was the opportunity to add value to specialty crops for the producer to earn money. Another reason is to help alleviate some of that product development burden, and we'll explain the process here to kind of give a taste of what's involved when you're doing prototype work for commercial products. We were trying to find a new means for specialty crops to extend the season. Here in the Northeast, we do have a short agricultural season, so we were trying to find ways that growers and value-added processors at large could leverage some product commodities in the winter seasons and farmers markets and winter markets. So the project specifically identified 12 shelf-stable acidified canned food products. So we first scouted certain products using Followup recipes and input from our partners in the Mass Department of Ag, and then we scaled them up into real product formulations, working through the specific food safety controls required for the regulation and for the public health threat. And then we had them vetted by a process authority and filed them in the proper protocol. So how we're gonna, the rest of today's program, we wanna walk through the overview of how we did this, and then walk through the actual process and the iterations that we have. And at the end, give you all, walk through the process that we want to be able to share these recipes with producers and processors for acidified foods. And we'll walk through that process of how we were able to do that. So first, we want to start off with my favorite topic. That might be sarcasm for those that can't hear it in my voice, is the CFR, the Code of Federal Regulations. And when we start to think about acidified shelf-stable food products, it's important to realize that there's a specific regulation for that. And so while this slide here isn't intended to show you the details of the regulation, we want to just limelight some of the key attributes related to the food products in this category. So acidified foods means low acid foods, which means that the pH has an equilibrium of 4.6 or below, or the water activity is greater than 0.85. And so when we're thinking about acidified canned foods, we're using pH often as one of the food safety controls, in addition to using heat and time as the factors to monitor the quality. So many of you have indicated that you do have experience with producing shelf-stable acidified foods, but for those that don't, we just want to remind folks about the general process that if you are interested in doing this, you first have to find a product. And as mentioned with the regulation, the products that we're targeting are using a pH below 4.6. That way we can process at atmospheric temperatures, which means that water bath boiling or hot fill and hold type of operation, but using pH as that factor to help us with the thermal process later. You then have to have it vetted by a process authority who issues a document known as a scheduled process. This comes directly from a qualified person, and they then provide the food safety parameters of the designated pH parameter and the specific time and temperature relevant to that particular product recipe in a particular package type and size. You then take this information and submit it to the FDA to file or register your facility and product so that the government is aware of the products that you're producing in alignment with the CFR 114. And then finally, the final component is that your operator has to be trained on how to process these products. And one common regulatorily approved training course is known as Better Process Control School. And specifically with the category of the products we're talking about today, it's a 2-day program specific to acidified foods. Coincidentally, there's other product trainings with Better Process Control School, but it's a 4-day program talking about low acid foods or pH products above 4.6, using different types of processing parameters to achieve the same food safe parameters for shelf stability. So as we start to think about this process, this is kind of how this idea of this project came about, of if we want to be able to extend the season and enable local food markets, you know, as a food scientist, we geek out on the development process of trying to leverage the quality of the product with the cost of good and still maintain product safety and quality. But we also recognize that a lot of processors or producers, that's not necessarily their focus. They want to either extend their overall production capacity or just try to be profitable. And so the aim here was recognizing that and trying to alleviate that by first doing the product development part of the project. And so one of these steps is off your roster. So in doing so, we have a variety of different products produced. So as you can see here, we have apple butter, a bread and butter pickle, a bruschetta in a jar, which is basically a tomato basil type of salsa, but it's not spicy. It's bruschetta. And you can see we've got a variety of different products here. And so, again, all of these products have scheduled processes and are capable to be shared. But as you can see specifically, it is vetted specifically for an 8-ounce and a 16-ounce and up to 64 in some of these product commodities. So just to kind of limelight some of the development process that it takes to make canned or shelf-stable acidified food products, for those that aren't familiar with product development in general, we'll walk through some of those pieces. And so as we had mentioned before, a lot of our growers that have been using value added have indicated to us that they have traditionally used ball book recipes. And for small scale operations, that has been accepted, but technically it doesn't fall in the grand scheme of being compliant with the other components of the federal regulations. And as we start to think about the bigger regulation implications in the food safety laws with FSMA, et cetera, trying to make sure that we have things in play we felt would be more helpful for processors. But as we started to further investigate, we realized that the ball book recipes are all based on household measures and not in a gram weight measure. And so when you're starting to do more of the other sides of the food science components of product development, the cost of goods, ingredient statements, food safety, risk hazards, and filing your scheduled process, that was the first part that we did. So this is here just a picture of one of our team members that takes the ball book recipe and converts that household measure into gram weights. And then we do a series of benchtop screenings, and all of this was done digitally, and all of the recipes that we have provided to be shared for our outreach are all done in an Excel spreadsheet. But we want to kind of limelight some of the key components when we're doing product development. And as part of my job with Extension as an Extension specialist, I routinely give product development technical support with a lot of entrepreneurs. And this is something that fundamentally I want to just, for those that are doing their own prototype development, we highly recommend that you work in gram weight measures. And there's a lot of different reasons to doing that. The primary reason is to maintain product consistency. You know, if we compare, for example, the way I measure a cup of sugar might be a little bit different than my husband. And so, you know, that end product might vary depending on the unit. But if we use just a weighted measure with a scale, we can produce the same product consistency throughout. So when we're doing these recipes, you'll also see that the products, you know, this was on the prototype benchtop. So we sourced our raw materials locally. And so it's always important too in the development cycle is to mark where you're sourcing these materials, as sometimes different ingredients can perform differently depending on where you source them. But from there, we then converted these recipes to a percentage. This is simply by taking the individual components and dividing them by the total weight into a percentage. And then from here, this provides us a whole bunch of different types of information. For starters, it gives us some rankings of the costs per pound. So if we start tracking our cost of goods, then we can calculate how much the product is costing us on a per pound basis. And it also helps with our scale up. So if we were starting, as you can see in the weighted bench, we started with a 1,500 gram batch. But if we were going into a production at our own facility or shared use space, for example, we might do something as large as 2,500 pounds. And so by being able to establish our formulas in a weighted percentage, we're then able to start using that yellow column against the batch weights to give us some more flexibility of scale ups more readily. And then we can take that cost of goods also and see how our production costs related to the batch or with other metrics that you might have. So in addition to that part of the process, we also did a variety of different measurements. Here at UMass, we are a food science nerd club, right? And we have the lab resources here. So we used a pH meter, a water activity meter, and a time with, a digital stopwatch and temperature. And these are components that we're constantly using to monitor, make sure that we're maintaining the product consistency, as well as anticipating where the scheduled process would be in compliance. So another thing that we did was when I had mentioned before that sometimes when you do household measures, you can have a variability among recipes. And so to help alleviate that variability, every time we ran any of these batches, we ran them in triplicate. And as you can see here, this example here is on a dilly bean, which is a pickled green bean. And what we're just trying to demonstrate here is that in the product development cycle, we manage the pH brine, the pH of the actual solids, in this case, the green bean. And then we also put the components together in the prorated ratio, homogenize it, and measure the parameters. For dilly beans in particular, we were looking at the pH as well as time and temperature. And as you can see, we were trying to maintain that product pH was well below 4 point, in this case, 4.2. So in general, this process was very iterative. Is the right iterative? So when we started benchtop screening some of these bulk recipes, we were confident that they were going to pass the preliminary food safety parameters because they are recipes indicated for household measure. But when we started doing these small batches, we were constantly trying to make sure that if we had any quality attributes we wanted to adjust, that we were always being cautious of maintaining its food safety with their parameters. And so our small batches were about 3 pounds or so, following again that ball book recipe. And then after we had run these samples in triplicate to knock out some of that variability, we then scaled them up in our UMass pilot plant. So it's not commercial production ready per se, but it's larger scale to get a better indication of the product consistency and any of the variability within the production. So this is roughly around 30 pounds or so. If the parameters ended up having a wider scope of variability and or if the product changed quality, et cetera, we would then go back to the benchtop and start all over again to make sure that our product met the standards and maintained its product quality. From there, we would craft a standard operating procedure that limelights all of how we actually executed this. And this is important on the benchtop, but also when we're starting to think about how to use these product recipes in operation, it's important to also limelight to your processing team of the other elements of how to use this, you know, including the jar size, the jar type, how to sterilize, those types of components as well. We then send those finished product recipes over to a process authority to get what is called as the scheduled process. I'd mentioned that is a document that limelights the food safety concerns, food safety controls necessary for production. In this project, we had a collaboration with the University of Maine, who issued our process scheduled processes. From there, we would cross-check the standard operating procedures to make sure that the parameters that we had initiated were in alignment back to the scheduled process. And from there, we then add them to the list of production ready. So obviously, or I guess we had hoped that we would have 12 recipes right out of the gate. But as normal product development processes happened, we did have some interesting challenges along the way. And so while we had intentions of having every product done, we still have achieved 12 products. But I want to limelight some of the trials and tribulations that we have. And so one product, for example, is blueberry jam. And my colleagues over at the Food Processing Center in Greenfield really want blueberry jam. And so because they have a surplus every now and then at the late part of a season, and they thought they could, if they had blueberry jam recipe, they'd be able to make jam and have it for the year. But we had some technical challenges with that. One is that the initial pectin that we started sourcing, when we started to scale it up, would have a terrible gritty, grainy texture, and it would no longer be viable. And so trying to source a pectin that would gel at the right strength and not break when we got to large kettle operations has not yet been identified. So it's not one of our successes, but it's also an interesting thing to limelight for any of the folks in the room here about thinking about adding on other value-added products with acidified foods, is that it's really important to think about your scalability, because that heat transfer that we have in the large scales had a profound effect on our end product quality. So we're able to successfully say that we can do blueberry jam in very small batches, 10 gallons or less, but anything larger than that, we haven't been able to successfully produce, but it's a work in progress. Another example of some of our challenges is with a product known as the zesty zucchini relish. And what we had found is on the small scale batches, this worked out fine. You get a smooth, homogeneous material of liquid and solids with these minced bits of zucchini. However, when we started to do large scale operation and hot fills from the kettle, we would get a large segregation of solids and liquids. And then trying to do this product with the two parts separate made it very challenging because the minced bits were significantly smaller, and we were hard, again, to getting some consistency that would be able to meet product operations in an affordable, achievable way. And another one that has recently been completed but took a little bit time to optimize was a cranberry sauce. And so initial prototypes we found to be usable, but when we started to compare against the marketplace, the sweetener of the prototype that we had was significantly different than the ones in the commonplace. So we had to do a lot of work to optimize that sugar ratio and still balance out its water activity, pH, etc. So again, it just kind of illustrates some of the iterations that are required in the product development process. One other thing I want to limelight too in terms of a challenge was something that we weren't expecting, and we'll talk about the FDA form in just a minute, but when you file the FDA form, and Maria will show this in just a second, but they ask you for what's known as an F value. And for those that might remember some thermal processing parameters, in food science, we're talking about canning. We have a Z value, a D value, and an F value. And the values have to are metrics related to the thermal kill rates based on temperature and time. And what's interesting is when we issued the scheduled process, when we made the request for the scheduled process at UMaine, it was not intuitive that you had to have the F value. We thought that when you asked for the scheduled process, the F value would be a part of it. But then we later realized that that's actually a separate line item on the request form, which from an extension perspective, as we're trying to share some of these best practices when you're looking at scheduled process, that was a very important piece of information that we want to make sure that people are aware of making sure that the F value is part of your process, your scheduled process when you make that request. So I'm going to turn over to Mariana, who's going to talk a little bit more about some of the forms and the actual process that we have for issuing scheduled processes.
Thank you, Professor Kinchula. I've been working in this project for a while now, and I've learned a few things, and I'm glad to be here able to share with you guys. So first, we're going to talk about the scheduled process, which, as Professor Kinchula had mentioned before, University of Maine, we got ours from University of Maine, and this piece of paper contains a lot of information that you need when you're making a product. It states the size allowed to produce, the processing method, and any other safety measures. So right here for jelly beans, it clearly states that the pH level needs to be below 4.2, even though the CFR 114, 21-114 states that for acidified canned foods, it needs to be below 4.6. For this product, the safety parameter is 4.2. So the processing methods and critical factors is clearly listed. And for this product, you need a bath canning time of 10 minutes, and 16 ounces or 32 ounces containers are allowed for this product. So you can't change the container size for safety reasons. And all the recipes that we have created contain this warning label because as a food safety perspective, you cannot change anything. It could cause like risks. So when you have the recipes, you need to accept that you'll not change the jar size, packaging type, and product formulations. We have created a digital manual, and it's available for whoever wants to get it. And I'm going to talk about how it is set up. So we have a general introduction about the project, and an overview of the acidification method. We also have how to understand the material and a section for each recipe, which contains a cover sheet, a standard operating procedure, a scheduled process, the FDA registration template, and any notes about the formula. So this is our cover sheet. It's where you can find all the information in one single page. We have the name of the product, the category it's under, the identification number, the date and place of development, the possible jar sizes, the critical factors, once again, the actual product pH and water activity when this product was made, the formula weight by percent, the skeleton procedure, which is just an overview of how to make this product, and the warning statement. The standard operating procedure is where you'll be able to find how to make the recipe in detail. It has the name of the product, the procedure, the ingredients by percentage, the instructions for processing, and once again, the CFR requirements. So the scheduled process, this is just a review now. You guys have seen this slide before. It contains the sizes allowed to produce, the processing method, any relevant safety information. Now, every product needs to be filed with the FDA, and to do that, you utilize the 2541E form, and it's very extensive. Uses the information from the scheduled process and the SOP. And then this is very interesting because if you do everything right and if your form is right, you won't hear from them. But if you file it wrong, they'll contact you. And this form can be filed online or you can mail it to them. And for us, when we were making the recipes, we filed the forms for two of our partners, the Commonwealth Kitchen and the Franklin County Community Kitchen. So this is the file itself, the form itself. As you can see, you need the volume, and each separate jar needs to have an FDA form filed separately. The pH before and after acidification and how long it took, the method of acidification, the processing method. We utilize vinegar for dilly beans and any microbial preservative, which for us, we only utilize salt. This is one of the last pages from the FDA form, and this is where you'll see the F value again. So here, you need the temperature where it was cooking, all the information that you can find in the scheduled process, and you also need the F value and the Z value. So these are the formulas that are and recipes that are ready for dissemination. If you guys are interested, all these jar sizes and recipes are available. And to get these informations, we need to, I'm sorry, we need to be approved. So we want you guys to make sure that you understand that these recipes cannot be changed, and by doing so, we'll be able to give you guys the recipes. So we need name, email, phone number, the food canning establishing number if you have, the location of processing facility, the name of the processor who attended the battery control schools, the date of process control school, location, anything else. We'll have, if you're interested, we'll later send out an email with this form that can be filled out.
Excuse me for 1 minute. Maria, can you just, sorry, forgive the audience at large. We're having a distraction on the from a room outside. So I'm gonna have Mariana just go over and ask our neighbors to quiet down. So I'm sorry for the distraction. But as we wrap up, I'm thinking about this program. We have already launched these products to the Greenfield Food Processing Center, also known as the Food Processing Center over in Greenfield, Massachusetts, and in Commonwealth Kitchen over in Dorchester, Massachusetts. And as mentioned before, we're willing and able to share these product recipes and scheduled processes to others, so long as they understand the ramifications. Mariana has already stressed the importance of thinking of this disclaimer, but we want to make sure that it's very clear that while we're able to share them, we want to make sure that the food safety parameters are taken very seriously. The other thing is that we've been able to, with this program, the other gain was that here at UMass, we've been able to teach some of our undergraduates the process of the development life cycle, if you will, and the process of the things that we talked about today of identifying the recipe and then weights and measures, converting it to a reproducible scaled up measure, et cetera. That we've now established a process, if you will, here at UMass that we're open and have the capacity to do future product formulations. And so as an example of that, we presented some of this work earlier this year in March, and we got feedback from the audience that some growers really wanted a pickled cabbage, and there was others that really wanted a cranberry sauce. And so with that input, we have been able to add those type of products into the portfolio. So if there are other products on your wish list, we would happily accept them and build them in the queue so that our digital library of products can be expanded. Future work that we're investigating right now is the commercial viability for market. So this project was identifying the 12 recipes and having them at the ready for the product development. But as we start to look more about the economic development side, we're looking to try to expand this project wider and find processors that are interested in acidified cans and scaling them up with more of the market research component of what consumers are willing to pay for retail local food products, and look at those costs and returns of where it makes sense financially, of how big of a batch do you need to make and still be profitable for your business and extend your season. So that's kind of the gist of the product overall. And we want to thank you all for your time, and also see, open it up at large for comments, questions, and any, we're hopeful that you will find this information helpful and be able to capitalize on these recipes for your own season extension. And before I open it to questions and polling, I just want to take a moment to thank a lot of different collaborators in this project. First, I want to thank NECAFS for being able to host this webinar and facilitate this, as it helps local producers and processors to expand their seasons with some processing. I want to thank the Massachusetts Department of Agriculture for sponsoring this work, as well as the Mass Food Science Department Experiment Station, as well as the Franklin County Community Development Center and Commonwealth Kitchen for helping us with the development of this work. I think that is all we have, Elizabeth. Is there any
Great.
questions?
Yeah, so do you want me to go through the questions first or launch the poll questions first?
Let's do, I guess, I don't know. It doesn't matter to me. Maybe we can do.
Yeah, well, there's a couple questions. How about we answer these questions and then we'll do the poll as we let people type in more questions and
Yeah,
then
great.
we'll see how it goes. Okay, great. So we had a comment come in from Michelle while you were talking about the pectin in the blueberry recipe.
Yeah.
And she says, what pectin are you using? We have only had success with Pomona pectin, which scales nicely for us up to 30 gallons.
Oh, it was Pomona, but when we've done it, what we had in our kettles, I want to say it was around 30. I have to go back and look, but what we were using Pomona, but when we got large, the structures would start to get really seedy. And we tried different orders of addition to introduce and hydrate and change the sugar ratios to see if we can maximize it, but we hadn't had any luck.
Okay, great. The next question is, how does a commercial kitchen get an FCE number?
If you have a commercial number, if you are a licensed facility, then you should have a commercial registration number. And all we're really looking for here is to pass a sniff test, frankly. We just want to make sure that when we share these recipes, that people understand that in order to produce acidified foods, you have a commercial license for manufacturing and that you have the person trained, etc. So when you get your permit, you should have some sort of demonstrated evidence that your facility is a commercial facility.
And she typed while you were talking, licensed by who? The county health department?
Yeah, you have to get for producing foods for commercial use, particularly for acidified foods, it has to be a wholesale license. And I believe that is local, but I'd have to follow up to confirm. I'm just going to make a note here.
Okay, and then another question from Alan is, do you charge a fee? And I'm guessing that means for the recipes. If you want to confirm that, Alan, it is true. But I'll just put that there. Do you charge a fee, Amanda?
Yeah, so no, right now there are no fees affiliated with our sharing our outreach here. So what we'll do after this seminar is we will email everyone with my email address with the link of the questionnaire. And so long as you have demonstrated that you have a few pieces in play, specifically that you've got a commercial facility and that you understand that the operator should be trained, et cetera, we will put you on our roster of distribution for the digital manual and give you access to all of the scheduled process recipes that we have for free.
Okay, great. Thanks, Amanda. The other question that's in the box is, would you be discussing any process for chutneys that are acid of a pH less than 4.6, but do not take well to heat?
So I'm not sure about the question. If the question is, have we looked at chutney? And the answer is no, for the very reason alluded in the question of chutney historically tends to have a wide distribution of pH that can waver above 4.6. And so the project aim here was try to get as many quote unquote safe bets of the acidified food category. But would we consider doing chutney? Sure. We probably want to discuss more about which ones, because chutney at large is kind of all over the place in types of if it's like a peach chutney or onion chutney, et cetera. So we'd be open to that. And then it depends. So we don't determine the process parameters for the product. That's driven by the process authority. So I guess that this is a sidebar thing to mention, but when we issued the 12 scheduled processes, where appropriate, we pushed for 2 thermal options, hot fill and hold and water bath canning. So for those that aren't familiar with canning, hot fill and hold is where you take your hot material food product and pour it in hot at a specific temperature. Oftentimes it's somewhere around 180, 185. And then you close the container, you invert it and hold it for a certain period of time to get lethality in the product before you cool it down, compared to water bath canning where you can fill it without as strict of a temperature and then you seal it and use a boiling water as a way to do that. So the reason why I'm mentioning the dual path was we didn't know what everyone's capacity is. If you've got a good holding tank that maintain 185, then a hot fill and hold is more efficient. But we tried to, where appropriate, issue scheduled processes with both options to give the flexibility. Now bringing it back to the chutney question, I'm not really sure. The thermal process parameter is usually driven by the raw materials and the pH, plus the variability of that pH in the product. But again, we'd be open to exploring that as a new product to add into our wish list.
And I'll follow up. She says coriander, chutney, mint, and coriander. And then Diane comments that wholesale food permits in Massachusetts are issued by the Maryland DPH Food Protection Program.
Oh, hey, Diane, can you please put the link, if you have it, in the chat box to share? That's great. Thank you for following up with that.
Great, thanks. So if folks have other questions, please go ahead and put them in the chat box. In the meantime, I'm sorry, in the question box. And in the meantime, I'll launch these follow-up polls to the webinar presentation today. So they are very similar to the questions you saw before, but now after seeing this presentation, how interested are you in producing and selling acidified canned products for specialty crops after attending this webinar? So many of these questions are based on having sat through this presentation and now having this information. And I'll just give it a few seconds here. Folks are still responding. And also, if you have additional questions, please put them into the question box. I appreciate that. All right, let's close that and we'll get to the next question. So now after this webinar, please rate your current level of the skills needed for producing acidified canned products from specialty crops. And again, the scale is 1 to 5, with no skill being 1 and very skillful for 5. And again, if folks didn't check the chat box, I did post the links for NECAF's information into the chat box during the presentation. Okay, thank you for that poll question. The next question is, what is your current knowledge after attending this webinar of the state rules and regulations pertaining to production and sale of value-added products? And I will say also that Diane posted the Massachusetts Food Protection Program website into the question box, but it's www.mass.gov/food/safety. Thank you, Diane. And I will also say that we're hosting this webinar tomorrow evening as well at 6 p.m. So if you have partners or colleagues who weren't able to come today, they can come tomorrow. Okay, let's close that. The next is, how confident are you that you will begin producing and selling value-added products from specialty crops in the next growing season? There was also a question before about whether or not this webinar would be recorded and posted somewhere for review after. And the answer is yes. All of the webinars are recorded and posted on the NECAF's website. And I did post that link directly to where the past webinars are recorded into the question box. So you can pull that and review this again after if you'd like to. Okay, thank you for bearing with us on all these poll questions. Another is, after today, how likely are you to adopt these acidified food stable product formulations at your facility or with your partners? And as Amanda noted, she'll be sending out an email after this webinar within the next week or so, asking if you're interested and then sending you the necessary information that you need in order for her to then release the materials to you at no charge.
Elizabeth, can I just raise a comment to that? For the person that was interested in chutney, if you had a starting recipe that you were interested in trying to explore, we can take that back to the team here and try to initiate some exploratory work to see, to assess the parameters of the product to see how close it would be to fitting into the acidified product, you know, and see if we can try to put that in the repertoire.
Thanks, Amanda. That's a great service you're offering. Okay, I've launched another question. There'll be one more after this. Where are you most interested in selling any value-added products that you produce from specialty crops? Farm stand that's your own, farm stand that's not at your farm, farmer's market, retail market, or other? And again, if you've got questions, so I've just got a comment. Michelle says, no questions, but thank you for this wonderful opportunity. We are a kitchen similar to Commonwealth Kitchen, but located in Virginia. I'm excited to add these recipes to our current list of offerings. I'd love to share our jam methods if you guys are interested in running a test batch. I also have some ideas for additional recipes for development if you have additional funding. So sounds like, Michelle, if you want to reach out directly to Amanda, please go right ahead.
Yes, Michelle, let's chat. I'm excited. Let's set up a call. Thank you for that.
Okay, sorry, this is the same one we just did, and that was the end of the poll question, so I appreciate that. If you've got any other comments, now's your time, and if not, we're going to go ahead and end the webinar for this afternoon. Michelle says yay and smiles.
Thank you all for attending.
Yes, thank you all very much. And thank you, Amanda and Mariana, for your presentation today. It was fantastic. And like I said, Amanda will be touching base with everybody through email after the webinar. So thank you and have a great rest of the day.
Yeah, thank you. Bye-bye.